War is hell. It reaches every hand, from the soldier in the trench to the nurse at his side, from the engineer forging weapons to the families left behind. These are their stories. This is World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. Today's episode, The Meat Grinder. The rain pattered against the lone window in the room as he shifted the package at his feet gently with the heel of his boot. Colonel Nathaniel Ward Hale had arrived well before the others, before Major General Edwin Cartwright, before Brigadier General Charles Whitmore, before Major General Samuel Harwood, and most certainly before John J. Pershing. Hale waited in silence as the members of Pershing's senior staff slowly filed into the conference room, almost single file beneath the dim yellow glow of the hanging lamps. It was Cartwright who spoke first. "Hale, when did you get back?" "About 8 months ago. I've been stationed in Maine inspecting coastal defenses." Whitmore looked towards him from across the table. "What was it like over there, in Europe?" Before Hale could answer, the door opened again, and Pershing entered the room. The men stood immediately to salute. Pershing returned the gesture quickly before shutting the door behind him. "At ease, gentlemen, please be seated." The men sat around the table, but Pershing remained standing. Everyone in the room knew he had just returned from Washington, knew he had just finished meeting with President Woodrow Wilson. Pershing removed his gloves slowly and placed them on the table beside the unfolded maps of France and Belgium before he spoke. 4 days ago, President Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany. He paused briefly. 2 days ago, Congress obliged. The room was silent. The administration expects rapid mobilization and immediate demonstration that the United States is prepared to materially affect the outcome of this war. Pershing began pacing slowly beside the table. The President believes American involvement must be visible, immediate, effective. He stopped beside the wall map of Europe. Congress expects movement. Newspapers expect victories. The public expects results. Major General Cartwright folded his arms. "And how quickly does Washington expect these results?" Pershing looked towards him evenly. "As quickly as possible." Nobody spoke after that. Pershing's eyes drifted briefly towards the trench lines marked across northeastern France on the map. "The President believes American spirit and American industry will change the course of this war." His voice lowered slightly. "Our responsibility is ensuring we have an army capable of proving him correct." Hale shifted slightly in his chair. He already knew what was coming next. Pershing looked directly towards him. "I sent Colonel Hale to Europe after the Lusitania sinking. At the time, I believed Congress might enter the war then, and I wanted someone to see firsthand what was happening over there." Pershing paused. "Hale sent reports. I kept those reports private." The room shifted uneasily at that. "But now," Pershing continued quietly, "I believe it's time all of you heard his assessment." The room turned toward Hale. Hale stood, telling himself to be slow and steady with this, methodical, just how he practiced in his one-room apartment. Then he took a deep breath and exhaled loudly. With complete silence making the room feel cold and eerie, he lifted the package off the floor. He set it on a chair and lifted the lid off the box. Then he removed the machine and set it on the table. The silence was suddenly broken as the others began to murmur in curiosity, but he did not look up. He did not speak. He kept his focus on the task at hand. From his satchel, which had been sitting next to the package, he removed another smaller package. This one was something wrapped in white paper with light red splotches in places. He lay it on the table and slowly removed the paper to reveal a large piece of meat. Now he looked up to see the curious looks on the faces of the others in the room, all except Pershing. He had a look of worry, his lips pursed tightly as he watched. Hale lifted the meat and placed it in the opening of the machine and began to turn the crank on the side of it. The meat began to slowly descend into the mouth of the machine and come out the lower end as lines of bloody, pulpy mess which plopped its way onto the table in a pile. When the meat was gone, when it was ground and sitting on the table in a messy mass, he sat down again. Major General Harwood stood first. Without saying a word, he walked towards the window and stared out into the rain. Whitmore finally broke the silence. "What exactly is the meaning of this display, Hale?" Harwood answered before Hale could. "That grinder is Europe." He turned slowly back toward the room. "And the meat is men." Silence settled heavily across the table. Pershing slowly sat back in his chair and put his hands behind his head. "That's about the gist of it," he said. Hale yawned as he stood at the window looking out over the training grounds. Sleep had become elusive to him over the last few weeks. Once again, he had arrived early for the meeting and now waited quietly for Pershing and the others to arrive. Outside, formations of soldiers marched across the yard with rifles resting neatly on their shoulders. Beyond them, another group jogged through the mud while further down the field men practiced bayonet drills against straw dummies. Hale watched them for several moments before quietly muttering to himself, "Pointless." "What's pointless, Hale?" The voice behind him startled him enough that he turned quickly from the window. Pershing stood near the doorway removing his gloves. "Nothing, sir," Hale answered before moving towards one of the nearby chairs. Cartwright, Whitmore, and Harwood entered just behind Pershing and took their seats. As usual, Pershing stood. "Whitmore, brief me on materials planning." Charles Whitmore was young, in his mid-30s, much like Hale. He was intelligent, ambitious, and outspoken, but respected. "Sir," he stood up, "I have reached out to 17 different companies in the last 3 weeks about food procurement. All 17 have graciously began producing tinned beef, coffee, and other items we'll need in the field for the men." "Water?" Pershing asked. "From what I understand, there's plenty of that falling from the sky in France." Whitmore laughed at his own joke, but stopped abruptly when he realized that nobody else was. That is also being packaged for us to send, sir," he said seriously. "Good. Harwood, brief me on recruitment efforts." Samuel Harwood was an older man. Hale guessed he was in his late 50s. He was tall and lanky with a balding head of silver hair and silver handlebar mustache. "Well, sir," Harwood began, "we've had quite the surge of volunteers since the release of the Zimmerman telegram. That, coupled with reminding the public of the Lusitania, has really rallied the people. Recruitment seems to be a non-issue. However, we're seeing a record number of Negroes volunteering, and we have no idea what to do with them." Pershing looked up from the notes he was taking. "You trained them, Harwood." "We intend to, sir. What I meant was that most of our white troops will outright refuse to be mixed with the blacks, and since they're volunteers, we may lose them if we push the issue." Pershing pursed his lips as if to respond. Instead, he moved on. "Cartwright, tell me about training." "Sir, we have 110,000 men in our various bases as we speak, all being put through the standard training regimen. They should be ready to deploy to France in about 4 weeks." Hale had heard enough. "Excuse me, but what do you mean standard training?" he asked. He watched as Pershing looked at him disapprovingly. Whitmore cringed. Harwood hid a wry smile, and Cartwright briefly wondered if he should answer the question. "What I mean, Hale, is we're using our standard training methods, all of the methods that have served the United States well in the past. Target shooting, bayonet drills, endurance training, horse training, and discipline. Why do you ask?" Hale put his hands together in front of him on a table. "I ask because nothing over in France is standard. Aside from endurance training, I don't see how the rest of it is relevant over there." Pershing spoke next. "Hale, these are the tried and true methods the United States Army has utilized for many years, and they've served us well in places like Mexico." "With all due respect, sir," Hale began, "Mexico was fluid, it was moving. Men using rocks, walls, and even buildings for cover. France is at a stalemate." Whitmore interjected now. "They're at a stalemate because France and Britain were not aggressive enough. Instead of charging through, they dug in and allowed the Germans to dig in as well. We should strike like lightning." He paused for effect. "And we should be brutal about it." "I saw the armies try and strike like lightning," Hale said quietly. "Then I saw German machine guns cut them apart." The room fell silent again. "I saw artillery turn entire fields into craters before men could cross them. I saw airplanes dropping bombs into marching columns. I saw cavalry horses tangled in wire while men riding them burned alive beside them." Hale looked directly at Whitmore. "This war is not Mexico." "That's enough," said Pershing. "Hale, please brief me on the status of our uniform and weapon supply." Hale knew then that none of them truly understood what waited for them in France. Standing on the deck of the ship, Hale could see the faint outline of France in the distance beneath the gray morning sky. They were close now. Behind him, the transport ship groaned loudly as thousands of American soldiers slowly began waking below deck, unaware that Europe now sat just beyond the horizon waiting for them. Hale had done his part. Garment companies across the country had been contracted to manufacture millions of uniforms in countless sizes. Warehouses had been repurposed into storage depots and factories producing shells, rifles, vehicles, and medical equipment. Rail lines had been reorganized, supply routes planned. Even gas masks. That, more than anything else, had stayed with him. Not the rifles and machine guns that can rip men apart in seconds. Not the artillery that can turn a man into nothing but a floating red mist. It was the gas mask that the United States Army was now manufacturing. And for what? For soldiers to survive the very air around them. But despite all of it, something still gnawed at him deep inside. No amount of uniforms or ammunition could prepare these boys for what waited ahead. He had seen the Western Front. He had seen artillery turn men into pieces too small to bury properly. He had seen machine guns tear apart advancing lines in seconds. He had seen gas dripped silently through trenches while soldiers clawed desperately at their own throats. Footsteps approached quietly behind him. Pershing stepped beside him at the railing and stared towards the distant French coastline. For several moments, neither man spoke. The ocean rolled steadily beneath the ship while cold winds swept across the deck, carrying the smell of salt water and smoke from the stacks overhead. Finally, Pershing spoke. "I've thought about what you said." Hale glanced toward him but remained silent. "Every night, since we left New York," Pershing continued, "about the training, about France." Pershing folded his hands behind his back as he stared out towards the coastline ahead. "I'm afraid you may be right." The words surprised Hale enough that he looked towards him fully now. "These men are not ready for what waits over there," Pershing continued quietly. "Not yet." Far below deck, a whistle sounded somewhere inside the ship, followed by the muffled voices of waking soldiers. "I've spoken with Cartwright and Whitmore repeatedly during this crossing," Pershing continued. "Both insist the men are ready now. Both believe France will refuse additional delays." Hale nodded slightly. "They probably will." Pershing gave a faint, humorless smile. "Whitmore believes the Germans are advancing too quickly for prolonged preparation. Cartwright believes additional training will damage morale and confidence." "And what do you believe?" Pershing's eyes remained fixed on France. "I believe that if we send these boys directly into those trenches, we'll lose divisions before they even understand the battlefield." Silence settled between them again. In the distance, Hale could now make out the faint shapes of buildings along the French coastline beneath the morning fog. Pershing exhaled slowly. "When we arrive, I'm insisting the men train alongside French veterans before deployment." He paused briefly. "I don't particularly care if Boutain likes the decision." Hale almost smiled at that. "The French need bodies," Pershing continued quietly, "but I need soldiers." For the first time since leaving America, Hale felt the weight inside his chest ease slightly and then tighten again as a realization occurred to him. No amount of preparation, no amount of equipment, and most certainly no amount of training could keep thousands of men from being victims of the grinder. The thunder outside blended so completely with the shell fire in the distance that Hale could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. Some men said that he would get used to it, but he had never gotten used to it when he was here last, and he certainly was not growing accustomed to it now. It had been a week since they had disembarked in St. Nazaire and taken the train here to Chaumont, where the Americans had converted an abandoned 3-story schoolhouse into their headquarters after many of the city's families have fled and taken their children further south away from the fighting. Pershing had been gone for 3 days, touring the front lines for the first time and meeting with the French and British command. Today, however, he would return, then their meetings would begin. He lay in his cot listening to the noise outside, the cadence of drilling troops, the rail yard with its familiar cacophony of whistles and metal-on-metal screeches, the neighing of horses, and of course, the occasional motor car. He had just closed his eyes and began to nod off when he heard a knock on his door. "Yes," he said groggily. "Hale, it's Harwood. Pershing's here. We'll need to meet him downstairs." He had been expecting this, and as a result, he was already rising from his cot before Harwood had even finished his sentence. And 2 minutes later, the two men were walking down the stairs towards the school library, which served now as Pershing's office and meeting room. Pershing, Cartwright, and Whitmore were already in the room when Hale and Harwood entered and sat down. Pershing began as soon as the door closed. "I spent the last 3 days at the front, as you all know, and let me just say we should all feel fortunate to be 5 miles away from the front." He took a moment to let his words sink in a bit. "Anyhow, I met with French and British brass. They're hurting for men, and now I can see why. But I explained our training regimen back home to them, and they agreed that our men need more training. They have some men that can come and assist us with this." He stood and walked around the table to the window that looked out to the makeshift parade grounds at the rear of the school. "While I was there, I saw a boy. Couldn't have been more than 19 years old. I saw him go over the top. He ran like hell towards the enemy. Brave lad he was. Through my lens, I watched him jump from one shell hole to another, until he finally was ripped in half by machine gun fire." He paused again. 19. He turned towards the table. I'm afraid Hale was right. It was Whitmore who spoke next. "So what does France and Britain do in the meantime? They need men. We have men. If it's truly how you say it is out there, then how will more training even make a difference? Feels like a waste of time to me." Hale felt his apprehension about the subject rise within him. He had been having these same thoughts lately, but still, the mere thought of sending ill-trained troops to the front made his stomach queasy. "Whitmore," Pershing began, "I understand your position, I really do. More men can equal more Germans killed can mean more ground gained. More ground gained, and quickly, can mean an end to this war." Hale looked to Whitmore just in time to see him sit back in his chair, a smirk of confidence across his face. But Pershing was not done. "That being said, putting men out in the field that cannot recognize the sound of artillery, cannot recognize a gas attack, cannot effectively shoot long distance, which, trust me, Whitmore, it's something this requires." He stopped for a moment, almost as if he lost his train of thought. Then just as quickly as he lost it, it came back. "Our men need to know the value of a shell hole. Our men need to know not to freeze up when the machine guns start, and believe me, even with training, some still will. Our men need to shoot straight and accurate, 1 bullet, 1 kill if we can. Our men need to be able to throw grenades at a great distance. Our men need to be prepared. This is not just about gaining ground anymore. It's about America not losing too many men in the process of taking it." Hale could see the pressure on Pershing's face as Pershing walked back to the table, took a seat, and put his head in his hands. The room was in complete silence for a moment until Pershing lifted his head and spoke again. "But Whitmore, you're correct about one thing. France needs men now. And if we take the time to adequately train our boys, so some can actually survive this travesty, then we risk Germany steamrolling over France, and us being here will be for nothing." After a few more moments of complete silence, Whitmore cleared his throat. "Maybe we can do both, sir." How? Pershing asked. Whitmore seemed apprehensive to say his next words. We give the Negro regiments to France. Hale was flabbergasted at the suggestion and could not hold back his shock at the words. We what? He asked. Pershing held his hand up to silence Hale. Come again? Pershing asked. Whitmore continued. Right now, we're utilizing the Negroes in an infrastructure capacity, digging in, building railroads, unloading cargo, stuff like that. But they are bodies, which France requires. They have been trained, he paused, to our standards at least. Harwood spoke next. It makes sense. Gives France the men they need and gives us time to train the more valuable troops. The troops that have more added value in the long run, Pershing added. Cartwright added, white men can build infrastructure just as well, if not better than the Negro. Hale wanted to object. Sending men to be cannon fodder, any men, was morally reprehensible to him. But the more he thought about it, the more he saw the logic in it. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of meetings. 6 weeks of reading reports and organizing stockpiles of uniforms and weapons. 6 weeks of sleepless nights, all in preparation for today. The rain had seemed endless. It must have rained every other day since he had arrived in France. It was raining now. Pershing had rarely been seen in the last few weeks. He was spending his time in places like London, Paris, and at the front. He had relied heavily on Hale, Whitmore, Cartwright, and Harwood to perform the tasks assigned and in the timeline expected. Colonel Nathaniel Hale had done his part. The uniforms were present, the weapons, the canteens, and most importantly, the socks. The troops would be well equipped. As a result, he had been recently promoted to Major General. He stood in a third-floor window overlooking the parade ground, Harwood and Whitmore flanking him on either side. They said nothing. They just watched. Hale could see that the men moved differently now. When they arrived in France, they had walked with a swagger and confidence that would make an enemy's knees shake. Now, they moved more methodically, more rhythmically, and with a more tempered sense of expectations. Hale heard footsteps behind them, but did not turn around. A moment later, he heard Cartwright's voice. Got some dispatches from the front. Hale stood where he was, while Whitmore and Harwood turned around to face Cartwright. And? Harwood asked. Cartwright began. You won't believe this, but apparently our Negroes are outperforming the French troops out there. That's interesting, quipped Whitmore. What happened? Asked Harwood. Hale, still looking out the window at the men gathering below, listened. Heavy shelling in a place called Sechal near the Argonne Forest. The dispatch says that the French troops turned tail and ran while our boys stood pat and held their position, Cartwright explained. Good for them, Whitmore said dismissively. Our boys don't run, Negro or not. A few of them are even getting the Croix de Guerre, Cartwright added. What's that? Asked Harwood. That's their highest commendation, much like our Medal of Honor. Whitmore said nothing as he turned back to the window. Outside, Hale watched as the men in clean uniforms were beginning their march down the muddy road that would lead them to the front lines, to the chaos. Somewhere, in the distance, a train whistle screamed, and Hale heard the metal-on-metal scraping of rail on wheel. In his mind, he could hear the grinder churn. You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, where history comes alive through the lives of those who lived it. If this episode moved you, please share it, follow, and leave a rating. Help keep these stories alive. Want to hold these stories in your hand? Explore the books inspired by them, available now on Kindle and in paperback.